All right, let's call to order the Home Rule Advisory Group meeting, March 14th, Pi Day, 10 a.m. Here in CC8 in Diamond Bar. And we're supposed to have Johnny Raymond at the Air Resources Board. Johnny, are you there?
Yes, Dr. Liu, I'm here.
Okay. And John Youngvarsky, I think it is, at EPA? Not yet? Okay. Ping Jiang and or Roshang at SCAG?
Good morning, Dr. Liu. Rongsheng only here.
Okay. How are the new offices?
Very nice. And as you may be aware, President Trump stayed in this hotel, so the streets were closed.
Yeah, well, I know.
Yeah.
I work across the street. It was a little crazy yesterday.
Yeah, really bad.
Yeah. Janet at Steve in San Francisco, are you there? Don't have Janet yet. And Larry Rubio at Riverside Transit?
I'm here, Dr.
Hi, Larry. Okay, so that's the everyone on the phone. Why don't we go around the room and give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves.
Phil Klein, Deputy Executive Officer, SCAQMD.
Larry Smith, California Companies.
Terry Roberts, American Lung Association.
Laura Nevitt, SoCalGas.
Bill Lamar, California Small Business Alliance.
Bridget McCann, WestBuck.
Kurt Coleman, Southern California Air Quality Alliance.
Tyron Turner, Dakota Communications.
Kristen Torres-Pauling, County, Los Angeles.
Ann Scaglione, AQMD.
Bill Long with General Counsel's Office.
Okay, and why don't we start off? That's the opening comments and introductions, other than complaining about President Trump making travel miserable. I couldn't find my bus. I normally pick the bus up on the corner to get home, and it wasn't there, and the street was blocked off.
You should have
I had
when
to.
it was idling.
I had to. The other one that was idling was just sitting there, an old diesel bus, just basically a few feet from where I was supposed to pick up my nice, clean bus. So I ended up having to go on the metro, take it one stop, get off, and then get on my bus because the bus did show up at the next station down. Anyway, I did make it home despite the inconveniences of a presidential visit that I think are carrying over to today, at least in Westchester, from downtown to Westchester. But that's it in terms of opening comments. And we can go to item 2, which is the minutes. We always look to Bill Lamar, who reads them more carefully than
Thank you for all the reading.
I reviewed the minutes and they look just sterling, not a typo or anything.
Okay.
Congratulations, Ann.
At which point we turn to the rest of the members to see if they found anything. If they look good, we're going to deem them complete and approved before moving on to item number 3. Federal and EPA and federal activities, other than the movements of the president. John, do you have any updates for us?
Hi, good morning, everybody. This is John Youngvarsky. So I do have quite a few updates, so I'll try to be succinct. And I'm pinch hitting basically for Amy today. So please bear with me. Hopefully this will go smoothly for everybody. Can you hear me okay on your end?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So just a couple staffing related notes. Elizabeth Adams has returned from a 4-month detail in Washington, D.C., is now back as our division director here in the Air Division Region 9. And we still don't have a regional administrator. So Alexis Strauss continues to be our acting for the foreseeable future. And then just on some planning related actions, some of you may have already heard that there was a court decision back on February 16th, and this actually was the South Coast versus EPA decision by the Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia Circuit Court, and it has to do with implementation of 2008 NAAQS and some backsliding requirements related to the vacature of the 1997. It was on NAAQS 2. So this is definitely going to impact some of our plans and some of the work that's actually in the House right now. But a lot of it remains to be seen in terms of how this will play out. There's a possibility, EPA is weighing its options internally in terms of how to react to the court decision. And I think something will be coming out about that, within the next few weeks. So, but a lot of it is just internal at this time. And I'm sure the South Coast can talk a little bit about the decision too, from their perspective. So I'll move on. The other item I think that's important is the designations for the 2015 Ozone Act. And in January, there were some court filings that EPA indicated they would try to finalize the designations by April 30th. And then just earlier, I believe this week, the U.S. District Court for Northern District of California agreed with EPA's plan to complete the designations by April 30th. So it's probable that sometime after April 30th, there'll be a 30 to 60-day effective date associated with, when it gets published. I'm not sure. I'm assuming that that April 30th date will be the date that EPA will sign the final action, and then there'll be a period when slight delay until it actually gets published, and then the designation, the effective date would be 30 to 60 days. But I don't know I don't have much additional information about that at this time. So I'll just move along unless somebody has questions. I have a number of planning-related actions that have occurred that I think are important to note. So on February 12th, there was a publication of a full final approval. Now we have a full final approval of the 2006 PM 2.5 moderate area plan. So that's good news. And the sanctions that resulted from a prior partial disapproval are permanently terminated as of 14th today. That's the effective date of the action. So that's good news. In terms of EPA's acting on the 2016 AQMP, we're continuing to work through those pieces. I don't think we have any hard and fast dates yet for when we might propose something, but there's definitely work going on internally here. And the DC Circuit Court decision could come into play in terms of when we're able to take action on some of the ozone parts. Another action that we did recently that I worked on that's worth mentioning, and this was published on the 27th of February. We proposed to approve 4 measures that are basically CARB mobile source measures that have been submitted for inclusion in the state implementation plan. These are for hovercraft, in-fuel, diesel fuel, transport refrigeration units, on-road heavy-duty diesel engines, and off-highway recreational vehicles. And the comment period for that action ends on March 29th. And then nationally, there's quite an effort going on internally at EPA to use the lean process to make our whole processing of SIPs much more efficient. That's being led by Henry Darwin, who's our Chief of Operations, formerly with the state of Arizona. And that continues to play out, but I can tell you that's something being taken very seriously at EPA.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
What is the lean process?
What is it?
Yeah.
Well, I think it probably came from the business sector, and it's something that's been used to help make a variety. I guess whatever the type of work you're doing, it's a very recognized method to make the process more efficient. You use bowling. There's a whole language associated with it that I'm not well steeped in, but I can send you some information about it.
Is that what that is?
Excuse
Okay.
me?
Then I am familiar with it then. Thank you.
Yeah, it's basically a process to make things run much more efficiently, to cut out the waste, in other words. So I was going to switch now to some grant updates, unless somebody has any other questions. So on the West Coast Collaborative and DERA, the West Coast Collaborative was awarded $12.5 million in FY17 DERA funding. And there were 19 recipients in regions 9 and 10 states and territories. So for FY17 DERA projects in the South Coast specifically, there are 2 grants totaling $3.5 million. One is $1 million to replace 10 2012 or newer diesel trucks. And then there's another one that has to do with the City of Long Beach Harbor Department, and they were awarded almost 2.4 plus million to replace old marine vessels and cargo handling equipment engines with Tier 3 or all electric zero emission engines at the Port of Long Beach. And then switching to next year, 2018 DERA RFP should be released in early April. We don't know the funding amounts yet, so there's differing amounts depending on the President versus Senate versus the House. So that still remains to be seen. But I guess the news is that we're anticipating at least the RFP coming out in April. So maybe they'll have the funding amount set by then. There's also a West Coast Collaborative Partners meeting that's going to be held in October 17th and 18th at the California Railroad Museum in Sacramento. For all of these items, I have links. If people want to get more information, I'd be happy to share those. Another type of grant that we offer here is the Targeted Airshed Grant. And I don't have a lot of specifics about projects, but the request for proposals closed back in October of last year, and there's going to be about 30 million awarded nationwide, but I don't think those awards have been announced yet. And the FY18 targeted airshed grants are still, there's a lot of questions about when the RFP will be released for that and the amount of funding, because it's also caught up with the federal appropriation. So that's a bit of a question mark. I have another item here on the Clean Air Technology Initiative. And in 2017, the region provided about $500,000 in funding assistance to South Coast to support a few projects. And I won't mention those unless people want more details. And it's a similar story with the next year's funding, or FY18, is that it's caught up in appropriations. There's some questions about that. We don't have all that information yet for FY18. And then I have one more. This will be my last item. It's on technology, also related to West Coast Collaborative. So it's West Coast Collaborative Medium and Heavy Duty Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Corridor Coalition. It's a pretty long name. So EPA is working with partners in California, Oregon, and Washington to facilitate alternative fuel infrastructure planning and deployment to support low and zero emission medium and heavy duty fleet operations. And there's an opportunity for South Coast input there. And many of you may know John Nicholin, and he's kind of the go-to person for that. My understanding is they've already reached out to CAPCO and South Coast SCAQMD staff on this, so hopefully the appropriate folks are already in the loop. That's all I have here from EPA.
Any questions for John? Comments? Anyone on the phone? John, if everyone in Region 9 doesn't already know about this, Jared Blumenfeld has started a podcast called Podcast Earth, I think it is. Right?
I think so, yeah, we've heard about that too. Thank you for sharing that.
He can't seem to make it through a single episode without using profanity, but other than that, there's some interesting stuff. The first one was Lisa Jackson, was actually pretty interesting. Okay.
Oh, great.
No comments from our member of the public? Okay. Thanks for that update, and we can...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Again, I'm not sure how, this is, I apologize, I haven't sat in on these calls before.
Oh, no, this is the same stuff that we get from, whoever was on the line. This is, there was a lot of information, but it's exactly what we're looking for.
Okay, but if people want links, I'm more than happy to provide them if they need more details on any of these projects. Or
I don't think that's going to be necessary this time, but we'll let you know.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, John. Chris, were you on from Air Resources Board?
And this is Johnny Raymond, Dr.
Okay.
Lou.
Right.
I'll be providing cards today.
Okay, so we're on item 4 and your item, so please go ahead.
Great. And I'll keep this brief, just hitting on the highlights of the current activities here at the Air Resources Board. We have an upcoming board meeting on March 22nd and 23rd. It'll span over 2 days, and it'll be in Riverside down in Southern California. Some of the items that will be presented to our board is consider updates to SB 375 targets. And part of that update will also be certifying the final environmental analyses. Also, we'll update our board on the state implementation plan and the South Coast SCAQMD. In addition, we'll update our board on, we've been working through some concepts to minimize health-related impacts from freight facilities. Our staff have been out conducting workshops around the state, and so what we plan to do is just update the board on where we're at with those concepts to potentially regulating freight facilities. In addition, our staff will update the board on current activities as part of our AB 617 efforts. A couple other things that I wanted to mention. Last week, we just kicked off an effort to provide funding and grants to community groups as well as air districts, and that's $5 million, and mostly these are geared towards offering funds for technical assistance. We're asking for applications submitted by April 12th. More information is on our website. I can provide direct links to those for those who might be interested. In addition, in April, at the end of April actually 27th, we'll have a public meeting to consider proposed community air protection funds, and that will be supplementing our Carl Moyer program funds and guidelines. And so one thing I wanted to point out there is that there's $107.5 million for the South Coast Air Quality Management District. And so those funds are available, and that workshop will be here in Sacramento, but it looks like there will be a webcast available for those tuning in down south. And that concludes my update, Dr. Lou. I would open it up for if any members had any questions.
Yeah, and so the 27th is going to be a workshop, you said?
Yes, it'll be a workshop, and it'll be up here, but also have a webcast available.
And that'll be on the guidelines?
And that'll be on the guidelines, but also provide an overview of the types of projects as part of the guidelines, and it'll be supplemented, it looks like here, and so it'll just be staff presenting those. And so, for example, they'll enable more school bus projects to be funded, types of other projects like TRU opportunities for projects in those particular areas, and freight facilities.
Okay. So we've already accepted the money, but we haven't spent it, right?
I don't,
Because they're still developing the guidelines.
I think we've recognized the money upon receipt of the money, which I'm not sure we've received.
Okay.
Checks in the mail.
Yeah, well, I mean, with the deadlines in 617, everything is moving at hyper speed, and it's kind of, some things are getting ahead of each other when you would think they would have to be sequential. Any other questions?
Dr. Lou, I got a comment or question.
Yes,
actually.
Larry.
On the freight facility workshops, what was the selection criteria for those facilities?
And you know, I am not sure the exact criteria on that, but I can get you in touch with the folks who are intimately involved with that effort. Offhand, the staff that's a really good resource to talk to is Monique Davis, and she's in our Transportation and Toxics division. Offhand, I don't have her number, but I could get that contact information for you.
Very good, thank you.
Phil.
You're talking about the item in front of the cardboard, the freight facilities?
Correct.
So that is partially the direction that the cardboard gave staff when they adopted our AQMP and the state SIP strategy last March, and to look at ISR concepts. So CARB staff is coming back to report on those concepts, and they're tying it into a larger strategy on freight facilities.
Yeah, and they're actually not recommending indirect source rules, they're recommending aggressive rulemaking, both the things they already committed to, but also new rules to target some specific things that they've identified as priorities. So it doesn't look like it's going to be facility specific.
That was my question, really.
That's staff's recommendation.
Yeah, that's what staff
What
recommends.
their board says.
So if I understand this, instead of like picking on a facility, we're picking on a concept that would be applicable to.
Well, I mean, we were just talking about, for example, the TRUs, the transportation refrigeration units. So CARB staff is thinking that those are actually a very major source of diesel emission and exposures for communities, because they tend to be in warehouses that are co-located next to the communities, and they'll sit there for days sometimes and run those refrigeration units. So they're thinking, you know, they need to finalize the process they've just started with TRU rulemaking updates as one of those proposals. Harborcraft with another one. There's a few of them. Anyway, there's some stuff on the Air Resources Board website. If you dig around enough, you should be able to find it.
Thank you.
Details.
Chris, question, Tyron from Dakota
It's,
Communications.
Johnny.
Johnny? Oh, I'm sorry, Johnny. In regards to your air grant guidelines, now, are those funds available for neighborhood councils, since they are considered nonprofit, but they're under the city?
I believe so, but again, I would have to double check on that.
I think so.
Let me get back to you on that.
Okay.
We just had a presentation. I remember them having a slide about that, but I just not positive on that.
Yeah, nonprofits.
I do have a contact for you
It's not necessarily
for that as well.
So my understanding, just having looked at it last night, there's a list of, it's an eligibility list. And
Okay.
it's not all nonprofits. There's 501c3 or
C3s,
maybe, I don't know exactly which ones, but
Okay.
if you look on the website.
And others
there's
who
a
partner
list.
with nonprofits.
That's on the CARB website, I'm assuming, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and they have a slide. We have a slide deck posted, and that's what the gentleman is referring to. There's one particular slide that lists all of that information on there.
Okay, because one of the issues we're having, I'm on the Southwest Empowerment Neighborhood Council as the business rep and cannabis liaison. Yeah, I know. That's something to do with air. So we've been working with LAWA for the past few months in regards to the construction of the new LAX lanes, and some of the community members have complained about the planes moving over to their sides of the street, and we're having an issue with air pollution. So the question is, if we have monitors in those areas, or maybe house monitors, something we can do with you guys or even AQMD to even come out to explain to the community at our meetings. We meet every third Monday of the month, but it's at 6 o'clock, so it's after work hours, of course. But maybe that's something I can talk to you after. in regards to that.
Absolutely, and you know that sounds like a great project, and you would think that it would definitely apply. Ryan Atencio is the lead staff that provided our webinar last week, and I would definitely like to get you in contact with Ryan.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, there has to be a 501, either a 501c3 or a California Native American tribe somewhere involved.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if neighborhood councils are 501c3 or not.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Anyone on the phone or at the table? Member of the public? None? All right, Johnny, thank you so much for that update.
You're welcome.
And Philip has joined us, so for item 5, legislative update. Is there anything going on at the legislature?
So, and in fact, because the last home rule advisory group meeting was prior to our January and February legislative committee meetings and our special legislative.
Nothing going on there either, right?
I would just want some big highlights from what we did in the January and February meetings. So the one big thing that in January was basically and I may have touched on it last time, was there's a legislative committee approved in January to sponsor a legislative proposal that would modernize public notice requirements to make more efficient and cost-effective what AQMD currently has to do. The proposed bill would seek to change current burdensome mass mailing requirements to allow for more modernized ways of disseminating public notice, including electronic mail, internet postings, and of course, if it was not feasible, if it was requested, then paper notice would still be utilized. So that was approved in January, and later on in February, it was legislative language for that was also approved.
Has the U.S. Postal Service opposed legislation yet?
I don't know. I've not heard. The letters in the mail. So, and then in February, we had a big ticket item in a sense. There was basically a proposed sales tax increase legislative concept, which would, the proposal would seek to authorize from the legislature, authorization from the legislature to put a 1/4 cent sales tax increase proposal on the ballot for voter approval within the South Coast Air District, and this would be for providing air quality funds. But the bill would not directly create a ballot measure. It would only be an authorization to allow either board action or a voter-driven initiative process to put this proposal on the ballot. Basically, as part of this, there was a draft public survey that had been prepared and not yet put out at that time. So the committee recommended basically bringing the draft public survey regarding that proposal before the legislative committee to fully consider and to approve that. That happened at a later special committee, legislative committee during February, and had been discussed also by the board. So no action has been taken at this point, and I'm going to get to the March, but again, we're just focusing on the survey related to that proposal. Some other things that did happen during the February legislative committee meeting was there was a proposed fleet rule legislative proposal. As part of the 2016 AQMP, the board directed staff to seek legislative authority to authorize AQMD to require accelerated purchase and use of near zero and zero emission heavy-duty on-road vehicles for public fleets within the South Coast. Again, this bill would not directly create a rule, but simply secure legislative authorization for AQMD to go through the local rulemaking process on this issue, taking into account stakeholder input. So basically there was also draft language provided, and the committee did recommend approval of that, and it did go to the full board this past meeting, and that was approved. So that will be on our legislative agenda for this year. Then going to this past meeting that was just on this last Friday, that again brought back the full results, and there's attachments available for results of the public survey relating to the sales tax increase proposal that you can have for review. And essentially, we had a presentation by the polling company, Fairbank, Maslin, Mullen, Metz and Associates, or FM3, which is a reputable polling company. They presented the results of the public survey regarding the proposal, and as part of that, we learned that there's still a lower percentage of people that really know who AQMD is and what they do. So there was definitely some comments by multiple board members about how AQMD needs to increase public outreach efforts, basically to get the public more up to speed on what we're doing and who we are. Now, essentially, the survey results were reviewed, but this was moved on to the full board coming up in April for a full discussion and a decision as to whether or not a proposal relating to the sales tax increase, what they want to do with that. So that's still pending, but the survey is now out there in terms of information. We took on basically 3 state bills for position consideration. The first one is AB 2548 by Assembly Member Friedman. And this basically would authorize LA Metro in coordination with AQMD to jointly adopt a commute benefit ordinance that requires employers within LA County with 50 or more full-time employees to offer a pre-tax option program that would allow them to exclude commuting costs from taxable wages related to public transit or van fuel charges. Now, AQMD already administers an employee commute trip reduction program for the region, and that's Rule 2202. That covers employers in the South Coast with 250 or more employees at a worksite. And under this rule, employers have multiple options for compliance, including the one proposed by this bill. This bill would actually significantly expand the number of employers impacted because it has a lower threshold, and would potentially significantly increase AQMD staffing and resource needs if it were to be involved in administering this program. So the Legislative Committee took a position of oppose unless amended, and the recommended amendments would include striking references of AQMD from the bill to ensure that the district is not involved in creation or administration of this program, and also to harmonize any new program created by the bill with Rule 2202. The next bill is AB 2008 by Assemblymember Salas, and this would allow all Carl Moyer grant funds to be exempt from taxable income for the purchase of new zero or low emission engines. However, the current bill does not appear to exempt funds from all Moyer project types from being taxed. So the Legislative Committee recommended a position of support with amendments on this item, and the amendment would simply clarify that all Carl Moyer grant funds are exempted from state taxable income, so just to make it a clean exemption. There was a bill that's on the agenda, the SB 1144 by Dodd, relating to penalties and fees, and that was pulled and tabled for this meeting. The last bill is AB 2506 by Assemblymember Burke, and this bill would require, beginning January 1st, 2020, that at least 30% of newly purchased vehicles with a gross vehicle weight rating of 19,000 pounds or more purchased by the Department of General Services and other state entities for the state fleet be near zero emission. So the Legislative Committee recommended a position of support with amendments on this item. An amendment would simply add a definition for near zero emission vehicles, which would be a vehicle that meets or emits less than CARB's optional low NOx emission standard of 0.02 grams per brake horsepower hour. There was also an item relating to state and federal legislative goals and objectives, or making some amendments to that. That item was tabled to the next meeting. And we have some federal and state written reports that are in the packet, but no verbal reports at that meeting. And that's my report.
And the survey results are pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't really had a chance to look at it in any detail.
Sure.
Next one question.
I guess we're here in obscurity, so you have to ask a very obscure question. No one's paying attention, Lauren.
I'll do my best. I'll make it as obscure as possible. Phil, I just wanted to ask on SB 1144, I understand it was pulled. Mm-hmm. Do you intend to bring that back to committee, or could you share anything on why it was pulled, or what's
I think it's just, yeah, I think there's some Bay Area AQMD and other area districts basically is trying to coordinate our thinking on that bill. It's kind of a complex bill, so it was just better to hold off and kind of have everyone talk a little bit more and figure out what's the best approach.
Okay, yeah, understood. We're looking at that, as I imagine a lot of other folks are too. It is
right. Sure.
Thank you.
Bill Lamar.
Yeah, Philip, and this isn't a question to you, because I know you can't answer it, maybe nobody can.
Awesome.
More of a comment than anything. I was going through that survey, and I was struck by by what the presenter was saying about the percentage of people who weren't even aware of the district. And what came to mind is, I think the last board meeting before last, where staff asked for an increase to revamp the Right to Breathe promo. And last year, I think, I recall the governing board was sitting at the dais congratulating everyone about how many people have viewed that. And I know Dr. Berkman went into, made some elaborate comments about that. How does that square with where you have all these viewers who watch a movie that they can't relate back to SCAQMD? I mean, I've watched it several times. And that movie or that video, I think is with the last funding increase, you're looking at almost $1 million. And I guess that really brings up, is some questions as to, are these, how do you square these numbers? What impact does that video have, that very expensive video? Our fees, by the way, pay for 63% of that, with so few people knowing about SCAQMD.
Well, my response to that would be, I mean, we're dealing with what, nearly 16, 17 million people within the entire region. So that's a survey, a sampling of that, and oversampling. They did a lot of, they reached out to more.
I mean, I was surveys.
So I'm sure it's voters, that's what they target.
I vote.
It was high propensity voters, but probably, how many they do, a couple thousand, 800?
I think it was about 1,100, 1,200 or something like that.
1,200.
What we were told by the,
Oh, that's a pretty big survey for South Carolina.
Over 1,400.
Yeah, that's a lot. Randomly selected voters. But Bill, what we don't know is how many people would have known of SCAQMD had they not seen the video, right? It might have been even worse. So, I mean, we're stuck with trying to assess a situation that didn't happen.
I was actually struck that, what is it, 46% had never heard or couldn't rate SCAQMD. I thought that was lower than I expect based on my experience.
Well, especially because there's more concern about climate and smog issues. But climate and smog concern went up since 2001. But people don't even know who the regulatory agency in charge is, or responsible at least. So that's a little bit more disconnect.
And I think a lot of this is inside baseball. I mean, we're all familiar with it. You drive a living off of it. I guess I do too. But, I mean,
I don't.
Other people's adversity. But I think, on the subject of promotions or communications, when your public relations folks, Sam and so on, when they make these pronouncements about viewers, I've had some experience in producing videos, and one of the criteria that I've had to demonstrate in the past is not only how many people viewed it, but what behavior changes did it make? In the same way with going to a conference and for $2,000 or $3,000 or something like that. What was the takeaway, and then what happened to all that information? How did it change behaviors? So I guess maybe I should bring that up with the budget committee or something. It just struck me as those two statements or those two issues being in conflict.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the budget committee, there was board members that were basically saying, this shows that we need to do more outreach, such as a video or such as other things, to help those numbers, as opposed to, and that's the kind of thing that will help fix those numbers. That's the goal.
Personally, I think you got to start young in schools, interactive programs with kids in schools. So 10 years from now, everyone will know who SCAQMD is, because unless you're actually actively learning about the agency in one way, shape, or form, just seeing a video is not going to stick. And our little minds that get distracted so easily. Kristen, and then Tyrone.
I was going to ask for the bill number on the community benefits ordinance. I didn't catch it.
Yeah, AB 2548 by Councilmember Friedman.
Okay, and then what was the proposed unless amended to, and one of the items for amending was to harmonize with Rule 2202. What would that look like?
Well, since the one bill is 50 or more employers with 50 or more employees, and the current rule is 250 or more at a work site, basically limiting the impact of the new program that would be proposed by that bill up to maybe the 250 threshold, potentially. I mean, there's other ways just to make sure that, the other thing is, the one key is that the current rule allows for a menu of options for compliance. So we ideally don't want to have that impacted to say, we still want those employers to still have a menu of options and really impacting those. So if they wanted to go to a different spectrum of employers, then that's untapped. They're free to do that separately, and we don't need to be a part of that administration of that program.
Okay, so essentially making two separate programs is what you're saying.
That would be one approach, and this would be determined throughout the legislative year this year.
Because it's not complicated enough as it is.
You could harmonize it, but as written, even over 250, could be some conflicts between our rule. It could be very confusing for employers. They might have to be complying with two different things in two different ways. It could be problematic. But actually, there's several, at least one city I know of that already has an ordinance, like Santa Monica has an ordinance that has enhanced our 2202 and goes above and beyond our 2202.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we can, I mean, we have a pretty poor program, and I think a lot of places have pretty poor programs. And there already is a lot of confusion, so it might be, it's great to have the conversation again, because
I've been listening to updates on Rule 2202 for 10 years now, and I still couldn't explain it to anyone.
Which means it doesn't work super well. So
if I went back to my notes and,
the
the program description, I'd be able to remind myself on how it all works, but it is really complicated.
It's actually on the rule calendar for this year if we get to it, to make some amendments.
I was actually just going to ask about that. So I actually think this topic is a perfect topic for this group, because that bill on top of 2202 would create a lot of, I mean, basically it would be two concurrent programs potentially, which would be really difficult for employers to comply with. 2202 has its own issues, but it's actually, the health and safety code is what requires 250 employers or more.
Right.
Or employees
It used
or
to be
more.
100, right?
It did,
Yeah.
right, so there's a long legal history. I'm way too familiar with this program, as is Bill. There's a long legal history.
Well, and personally, and I've seen it too. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, so I actually find the bill to be really concerning. I think it's not intended to be that way, but I think there's probably a fair amount of ignorance in the legislature, or.
Well, that's why we have a legislative process, so
Yeah.
feel free to write your legislator.
The motivation behind the bill is, there's been some pretty low ridership numbers for Metro recently, and they're trying to find ways to bump that up. But
Yeah,
there could be other ways to bump it up.
interesting.
Amazing. Back to what we were talking about, people not knowing about the role of the AQMD. I remember we had this conversation maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and not much, since I've been here, not much has been done as far as reaching out to disadvantaged communities, I feel, still. Like you said, Dr. Lou, if we don't start young, I don't think it will go far. We have to start in the schools. I remember being in school, the saying 55 says stay alive, when you can only drive over 55 miles an hour, or buckle up, or stop, drop, and roll. It was put in me at a young age, so I remember it. I suggested before that maybe we should have some kind of community liaisons. You guys can't do it all. And that can reach out to neighborhood councils. You can use those for free, or even other community-based organizations. But if this stuff is not done, I mean, people don't know. I mean, you guys will be surprised at the amount of calls and emails that I get related to AQMD stuff, which I can't speak because I don't work here. I'm just a home rule advisory board, advisory member. But I can tell them the ways to how to deal with a auto body paint shop next door to them. People don't know that they have a number to call to complain about smells and construction, particles or whatever. They just don't know. But something has to change. Or start a community relations group like this that target specific areas that deal with problems like that. I just think that's something we should look at. Because everybody can't watch videos. I mean, who's going to show the videos?
So part of the direction that came out of Ledge Committee when they talked about the survey was to come up with a new outreach plan. Our Public Affairs Department's going to look at outreach and education plan, because this gives us a really good guide of what people respond to, what they don't know, the areas of education, and they're going to hopefully come up with something that could be discussed. Probably going to go to the board at some point.
Right. Well, did you guys decide to maybe start an ad hoc committee to help with that? What you guys are trying to do?
I'll bring it
Outside
up. You can bring
opinions?
it up to your bosses.
Yeah. I know, Phil, you have a lot of work to do. I know that.
Oh, no, that's.
Everybody, you
as
guys
we
really
mentioned,
do.
that was made, comments were made by,
Yeah.
multiple board members at that meeting that says, this is, and it would be multifaceted. I mean, it wouldn't just be videos, but, there is a need to get more name out there. There was another comment made, I think, that, a while back, whatever, if it was 29%, 30%, whatever is the recognition now, it used to be like 20% lower before, so people actually know it a little better now, but it's
actually
still
54% now. I don't think that's really a horrible number compared to where it used to be.
No.
And of the people who do know us, it's almost 2-to-1 favorable.
Right.
That's a good number.
Right.
Yeah.
And also surprising.
Yeah, I was gonna point out that recognition is not always favorable. So if you've been in the LA Times and on the local news for 2 years being slammed every day for not doing a good job, your
We were
recognition
slammed pretty
might be
good in
higher.
an editorial not that long ago. Larry?
I was gonna try to stay out of the conversation, Bill, but it's too good. Just really quickly, I think people get caught up and lost in the whole concept of government. And it's just another agency amongst many agencies. Just a couple of small examples, and I'll be quick, I was with an assemblyman friend of mine, and we were discussing, he introduced himself as, I'm an assemblyman from Sacramento, and the lady said, well, what do you assemble? So that was a great line, and he just looked at me like, yeah, I said, they don't get it. I remember I used to sit on RCTC, and we approved the 91 freeway expansion. We spent $1.3 billion, and in that approval meeting, I looked across the audience, and there were 12 people in the room. And I turned to another council member from Elsinore. I says, we just spent $1.3 billion, and only 12 people know about it. And it was really incredible how disengaged the public really is, I was in a city of 82,000 people, and 8,000 people vote. And so that's the
How
problem.
many people voted in the Los Angeles election last time around?
So it's the engagement process. I don't know the answers, probably early education, but it seems to be something that's infectious in our
Just about every student in the country walked out today, so
Right.
it's not like we don't have kids who care, who are ripe for learning about all these issues. So, it's a very good point. I don't know. I just don't. It doesn't.
See, I couldn't stay out of the conversation. I said, it's your fault, Bill.
I mean, we live in an insular. I mean, here
We do.
it's very insular, and we all suffer from the problem of enjoying reading government documents, which most people don't. All these processes.
Some sort of sickness we got to work through.
Yeah, I've been working on it for a long time, and I haven't found a cure. Okay. Any other comments or questions or observations? Anyone on the phone? A member of the public? Really? You have an opinion on this, I know you do. Okay, item 6 goes to Bill Wong and our litigation-related EPA actions item update. I'm not sure if you want to follow up on that ruling,
Right.
what that means for us, but.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lou. And actually, I did want to update the first case that actually is on my litigation status report. And I had reported that we were going to have a demurrer hearing on the case of Ferguson v. Coachella Valley. It was a case where it was challenging the funding for a 40-mile pathway. And so we had set a demurrer hearing that was heard on March 9th. And the court granted our demurrer. So we are, the case has been dismissed. so that is good news for us. I can also follow up a little bit on the case that John talked about, and that's presented in case number 10. And there were two issues that the AQMD was particularly concerned about. One was a challenge to, previously EPA had allowed the district, for purposes of Coachella Valley, to assess reasonable further progress by reducing pollution from outside the attainment area, simply because the Coachella Valley was downwind from a lot of the sources. EPA had changed that to require reasonable further progress solely within the non-attainment area. And the court agreed with that process, being that they found the language to be very clear that it was limited to the non-attainment area. In addition to that case, the environmentalists challenged the ability to establish RAC based on a kind of an average, I guess. They argued that RAC needed to be established by individual piece of equipment by individual piece of equipment. The court basically held in EPA's favor that they could assess a much larger group of sources. That's it. And if any questions, I can answer those.
Any questions on litigation updates? Anyone on the phone? Member of public? No? Okay, great, thanks for the update. What do we have next? Low-cost air pollution sensors. Dr. Andrea Polidori, please come up. Why don't you sit over here, be easier. Oh, you see the presentation.
Oh, is it okay if I sit over here? Or?
Yeah, sure.
I was told that you were bringing take-home samples for everyone.
Food samples. Maybe.
Oh.
Okay. Let's see.
Sorry about this.
Three plus years, actually, almost 4 years of field and laboratory testing on low-cost sensors. Basically I cover 4 major topics, and there's a lot to talk about, I think, about this topic, but I'll try to give you the highlights about, the current status of sensor technology, the difference between evaluation and certification of low-cost sensors, and a few application examples that possibly, the part that you are mostly interested in, and some of the challenges related to the use and applications of this technology. So, I don't know if some of you, possibly most of you, have had the chance to visit, our website. If you visit the AQSpec website, you can easily find it on, if you Google AQMD, AQSpec is always kind of, the first on the list of the Google results. But basically what we have been doing for almost 4 years now, we basically buy or borrow or, get every kind of low-cost sensor technology we find in the market, and then we do both field evaluation and laboratory evaluation. In the field, we compare the performance of these sensors to that of EPA-approved instruments to see, if a $200 PM sensors, how well it compares to a $20,000 PM monitor that has been approved by EPA. And then after, a field evaluation, we bring these monitors in the lab where we have a custom-made laboratory chamber, and we basically do the same test. We compare the sensors to EPA-approved instruments under different kind of environmental condition. This big chamber that we have in the lab can basically reproduce all kind of environmental condition you can think of. We can regulate temperature, humidity, the concentration of the pollutant of interest, and so on and so forth. But basically what you have here is a summary of basically what we found for PM sensors So there are two big categories of sensors that measure particulate matter and sensors that measure gaseous pollutants. So for PM sensors, in a nutshell, if you use, everything that is commercially available out there, you will find that most of them have a minimal downtime. So just to give you an example, we deploy these sensors in the field for a couple of months, and we are able to recover more than 98% of the data, which is quite impressive for a device that just costs $50 to $200. They have intramodal variability means that if you take different units of the same model, more or less, in most cases, they tend to read the same, which again, it's quite encouraging. And there's quite a strong correlation, between the PM sensors that we have tested and an EPA-approved instrument. So again, if you buy a $200 instrument, you compare it to a $20,000 instrument, the comparison is actually quite good. However, for PM sensors, in most cases, a calibration is needed. So let's say, a sensor is produced in the East Coast, they send it to us here in the West Coast. The correlation with the EPA instrument is good, but you need to calibrate it because it might read, 40% higher or 40% lower, we don't know. So the calibration is needed in most cases. A lot of these sensors cannot measure particles that are very small in size, so this is also a limitation. And nowadays, there's a lot of companies that, they apply algorithms to basically improve the quality of the sensor data. So we find that in time, we are not only evaluating, the hardware, but we are starting also to evaluate, how good these conversion algorithms are, for all of these sensor devices. But overall, PM sensor technology, it's pretty decent. And most of these devices can be used for community monitoring or other kind of applications. And I'll show you a few examples of application later on.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
I don't know. These portable sensors,
yes.
How are they powered?
So some of them are battery powered, and some of them are just, there is a plug that you use to power them. So there's solar power, battery power, and all different kind of power reduction you can think of.
Okay, and then those that are battery powered, does the charge in the battery affect its reliability or its accuracy?
Not really. It's not something that we have.
So as long as it likes the battery.
Basically on or off.
Just on or off?
Right. Okay, so on the gaseous side, for gaseous sensors, I think, the situation is a little different. I think if you want to measure ozone or maybe carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxide, there are decent choices out there. Especially for ozone, there is one device here that possibly you cannot see, it's too small, but it's not even that low cost. It costs about $4,000 to $4,500, but it's the only portable sensor that is FEM certified, meaning that you can use it for regulatory purposes. And it's fully portable. It's not bigger than, can definitely, can hold it on the palm of your hand. But I mean, again, it's a step in the good direction, and this measures ozone. So other ozone sensors that use different technology are a little cheaper, and they also do a good job, but they need to be replaced quite often. Long story short, if you want to measure ozone, NO, or CO, you have decent choices out there. If you want to measure, kind of more exotic, I guess, compounds, including volatile organic compounds, there are not many good alternatives out there. So the technology for measuring air toxics is still, needs further development. But that doesn't mean that you cannot use it for, real, kind of applications such as like fence line monitoring. If your goal is to know whether there's no VOC, some VOCs, or a whole lot of VOC, you don't need like, very accurate instrument. You can use something that is relatively unreliable. So I just wanted, kind of to tell you a little bit about, the issue between performance evaluation and performance certification, kind of the differences between the two. What we have been doing through AQSpec is pure performance evaluation. So just to give you a little bit of history, back in, maybe even like 10, 12 years ago, there's a group in Europe, JRC, they started to do this like performance evaluation of instruments. EPA followed in 2013 or so, and South Coast SCAQMD with the AQSpec program has been in business for about 4 years now. And these are all performance evaluation programs, meaning that they all do field evaluation and or laboratory evaluation. So actually AQSpec is the only one that has a very comprehensive laboratory testing program. So the parameters evaluated are, as I said before, the correlation with EPA approved instruments and other, statistical parameters to see how good these devices are. However, the key point here is that within a performance evaluation program, we just, evaluate the performance of the sensors, we put the results on the website, and we do not recommend, the use and application of these devices. Basically, we release the results and we let the user decide which sensors to use. So, however, there's a lot of groups, a lot of community groups, a lot of other air quality agencies, and a lot of sensors users in general are starting to tell us, so which sensor should I use, right? You have so much information about which sensors is reliable and which sensors is not. Can you please tell me which one I should use for my particular application? So in order to do that, we would have to basically, step things up a little bit and create, maybe not, at the very least, not just a performance evaluation, but something more than a simple evaluation. So, like the discussion about upgrading AQSpec to a sensor certification program has been, in our mind for quite a bit. And so basically, a sensor, there are different kind of certification models, right? The one that is based on pure performance, right? So it's like, becoming the consumer report of sensors. So if a sensor is very cheap, compares very well to an EPA-approved instrument, is very accurate, is very precise, of course you might get like 5 stars out of 5, right? But I think a better model for a potential sensor certification program would be based on application. So, I mean, again, if you have to use sensors for educational purposes only, to basically teach your students about, sensors technology, what they can use it for, etc., then a $20 instrument might be more than appropriate. So, one of the other issues here is that, who should lead the way in creating this certification program? EPA is basically leading the charge here, through their e-enterprise group. I'm part of them, and we have been discussing for more than 2 years now, how to create a third-party certification program. And the main limitation here is that we have very good ideas, we have developed different models, but there's a definite lack of funding. I believe to create a national sensor certification program would cost more than $5 million a year. That's kind of the cost estimate that we came up with. So maybe other people said maybe it should be South Coast AQMD in collaboration with maybe the Bay Area and some other CAPCOA air quality agencies. Maybe we can involve CARB, or maybe we should still think about involving EPA and other national labs. So there is discussion here, and I think that the main point here is that there is a definite need for more than a simple sensor evaluation program. So this is just to give you an idea, is an example of the sensor certification model based on a 4-tier system. And this has been discussed within, with EPA and other, groups. So there could be like 4 different tiers. Tier number 1 could be, sensors that can be used for regulatory or compliance monitoring. Tier 2 for fence line or community monitoring. Tier 3 for area or source characterization or supplement monitoring networks. And tier number 4 essentially for educational purposes only. The 2 main candidates for tier number 1 and 2 mainly are ozone and PM 2.5 sensors, because they are those that perform the best. And down here in the kind of educational category, you can basically use all of the sensor types that are commercially available out there. So to summarize, there are many advantages to a sensor certification program. You might definitely be interested in the first bullet point here. So provide guidance for the implementation of new regulation, including AB 617, Rule 1180 here, and other regulations. Provide credible information of the data quality, and ultimately stimulating the development of technology that we know works well. Disadvantages is that to do it properly, I would think that as I said, it is going to be a very expensive program, mostly because you need to involve other agency, and you need to do field testing for a long period of time, and you need to develop laboratory capabilities for conducting laboratory testings for organizations that they don't have a chamber like we do. Okay, so I'll give you some of the example of the use and application of these sensors. So the South Coast SCAQMD, we thought that, okay, we have been doing enough evaluation. What can we use these sensors for? And one of the first application back in June 2016, we basically built a sensor network around the waste disposal facility in Huntington Beach. We used, apologies. So we use basically a sensor that is commercially available, but we built our own sensor device. So in this case, this is solar powered, and it transmits data directly to a server. And we built 9 of these devices, and we basically cover the fence line of the facility. All of the sensors are installed high, at about like 10, 15 feet high on a pole. And it basically provides information 24/7 about fugitive emissions of PM10 from the facility. In particular, there is this side of the facility down south where there's a lot of crushing, there's a lot of recycling of industrial equipment. So most of the time we get hits like down here. Plus, this facility is going through like a remodeling. All of this, I believe, for the most part, this side of the facility is being enclosed so that to limit fugitive emissions of PM10. So we want to see, if the money that they're going to spend for this upgrade, is working, right? So we are getting data before, during, and after the remodeling. Some of the other, good uses of this sensor technology is to basically track, wildfire. During wildfire season, this is actually a little outdated. We have more than, so these are all of the, step back. So there is a company that is called Purple Air that sells, PM sensor devices that cost about $200. We have deployed about 130 of these devices. Coalition for Clean Air, I believe, has about 70 of them up and running.
A little bit less.
A little less, okay. And all of the rest, the 230, I believe, that are running in the South Coast, belong to individuals.
But most important, I got Mark to put one in Yorba Linda. See that?
Yorba Linda?
Yeah, right in the middle of that Orange County gap.
I see. Yes, and but so with this network, again, it's not very accurate. So the Purple Air sensors, most people found that they tend to read about like 30–40% high. But during wildfire season, they can definitely give important information about areas that are highly impacted by the smoke plume. So that's very important for air quality agency like ours. We can basically see where the plume is going, and we can work with the communities to basically post wildfire advisories and other good information like that. So yeah, this is one good application. And so this is another sensor network that we are building right now. Back in 2016, we got an EPA STAR grant, which is a research grant specifically devoted to working with community to educate them on the use and application of these low-cost sensors. Apologies. So right now we are working with 7 different communities in Southern California. On the main goal of the STAR grant is to basically develop educational material for community on how to use these sensors, on how to interpret the sensor data, and ultimately, the outcome of this program will be, we'll have a guidebook with all different kind of information about sensor use and data interpretation that other communities outside of California can use as the model for their communities. So we're working with 7 communities in Southern California. As you see, this is a retirement community in Seal Beach, and then we have other communities here in the San Bernardino area, other communities down here in the Los Angeles area, and so on and so forth. But so we also work with, at the moment, 2 communities in South San Luis Obispo, and soon enough we'll work with 2 more communities up in the Bay Area, with the Bay Area QMD. They have 2 communities under contract, but we haven't had the chance to deploy the sensors over there yet. So there are many challenges. I'm the first one to admit that sensor technology is great, but there are many challenges associated with the wide use and application of this technology. The first, if you decide to develop a sensor network, you need to start clarifying what the QA/QC requirements are. There's basically no documentation out there that explains how to validate sensors data. There's no SOP, there's no quality assurance document in general to basically guide both community members and other air quality organizations on how to use this type of technology. Also, we need to develop appropriate software application for handling the data. Just to give you an idea, each and every one of these PM sensors can generate 1 data point every 20 seconds. If you have 200 plus monitors that are running 24/7, 365 days a year, you understand that you get hundreds of thousands, if not millions of data points per year that now you need to validate, you need to analyze, you need to interpret, you need to map. So there is a small group here at AQMD that is also starting to develop like in cloud, like on the cloud, backend application for handling the sensor data. Data analysis interpretation is another issue. Consistency between sensor network, it's another big one. Let's say that, I don't know, as an actual example, within AB 617, you have, 20, maybe 10 different air quality organizations that deploy 10 different PM sensor network using 10 different PM sensors. Then, there's really a lot of inconsistency between the quality of the data from each and every one of these sensor networks. So, and then, the list goes on and on and on. Here, I just picked my top 7, but, possibly if I think a little harder, I can come up with another 10 or more.
You'll need a bigger slide.
Was that?
You'll need a bigger slide.
Absolutely, yes. So, but, this is pretty much it, and I know it's kind of a quick overview, but if you have any specific question, I would be more than happy.
Do you have a question from Lauren?
I always have questions.
Sure.
Quick question, Andrea. So back on the community air monitoring slide, if you would, which communities were those again? My glasses aren't strong.
Yeah, I have contact lenses, but I cannot really read the legend here. But there is a Asia Pacific Islander Forward Movement. They are located here in East LA. We just started to work with Southgate. We have not deployed the sensor there yet, but I think the next meeting is scheduled for before the end of March, and there we'll deploy 25 to 40 sensors. We have another group here with Seal Beach Retirement Community. This is basically we are doing some work with the UCLA, and they are one of the co-PI of this grant, but basically there is student housing, and they're interested in deploy sensors at different distances from the I-10. This is a group here, let's see if I can, so the Riverside Unified School District. There is another community here that is Sycamore Highland Community Action Group. They're interested in deploying sensors there because there's a lot of they're building warehouses, so they want to see if there is an impact from the diesel trucks.
What type of sensors are these?
These are all PM, although in some cases we have about 100 multipollutant sensors for measuring ozone and NO2. So we have a total of 450 PM sensors to be deployed, mostly in the South Coast, but also in Central and Northern California. And we have 100 multipollutant sensors only in Southern California. This is another collaboration we have with the University of New Zealand.
Mm-hmm. And so these communities groups are come to AQ Spec to work with you on their sensor networks, or what's the relationship? I'm curious.
Yeah, so we started as part of the grant, we needed to recruit 2 community groups.
Okay.
So we started to ask around if there was any interest, there was a lot of interest, so we went from 2 to 7.
Interesting. And you mentioned you're working with 2 communities in Sloan too?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we have the
Was there
first.
going to be a
component.
Central Valley component to that too?
I'm sorry?
Central Valley,
Yeah, we are.
Bakersfield, or
Yeah.
Kern County, something?
So we have a contract with the CCEJN.
Yeah.
And so we are just waiting basically for the San Joaquin Valley to come to get on board. Because we actually started working with that community group in one in Fresno and one in Bakersfield. But then, San Joaquin said, okay, we want to be involved. Let's slow things down so that we can kind of figure out the best way to approach this thing.
Bridget?
Thank you for your presentation.
Sure.
It was very thorough, thoughtfully prepared. About the certification process, I just wanted to kind of reiterate your comments about the applicability.
Yep.
I think that's going to be crucial, especially with the rollout of 617, 1647, and then Rule 1180 implementation. We do go through a certification process. All of the different applicability of all the different sensors is going to be really important to communicate,
Sure.
educate, and then to also reinforce your comments about QA/QC process, and then the education and communication of that, all of the different monitoring information and data, and then also just the amount of data that's going to be and the constraints with that, challenges. It's going to be important moving forward.
Yeah.
Oh, I did have a question, I almost forgot. You're going to be doing the QSense VOC sensor. Where are you with your evaluation of that? Is that still going on?
So we haven't started yet.
Okay.
So our laboratory chamber, we can test pretty much everything with the exception of VOCs at this point.
Right.
But we have hooked up the GCMS to the chamber, so we are getting ready to basically start evaluating VOC sensors too.
Okay.
But we have to write a method, we have to write kind of some of the protocol to conduct that type of testing.
Mm-hmm.
So that might take a while, but we are planning to do the definitely the field evaluation, but also the lab evaluation before we start the project with QSense.
Okay.
Are you still looking, or are you still getting partnerships developed with community organizations or other public entities, or is it sort of like the grant can handle this many and you're done?
The grant possibly could handle only 4, but we are at 7 and growing. But so that might be, we do have funding, I think, for maybe another one.
Okay.
But in terms of staff resources, just to give you an idea, all of this work is done by 5 people, me included. So it's a lot of work. We are hiring maybe a couple more pretty soon, but I think if there is enough interest, we are willing to.
There's additional funding outside the grant that has come through, which is the board approved some advanced for our MATE study. Familiar with the MATE study? Some advanced monitoring of the MATE study, which has 2 or 3 of these types of deployments. And then AB 617 is going to obviously include several of these as well. And there's hopefully ongoing funding there.
And Coalition for Clean Air just got some funding through a SEP program to do Alameda Corridor. So if you have an interest in that area, including but south of Southgate, all the way to Long Beach Corridor. So we have some 50 to 100 to deploy along the corridor.
Yeah.
And there's
one that is off the
you can build them for us. I mean, Adrian.
This one is off the list, it's off the map, but we're also working with CCV, which is in Imperial Valley.
And well, I guess that related, the timeline of 617, if there's going to be communities identified, and then we sort of have like an open question on certification. It sounds like, or like, what's going to be the relationship between the two?
I mean that's a good question. I think that in order to have a very solid certification program, you need to involve other entities. It could be national labs, could be Bay Area QMD, somebody that has the capabilities of doing what we do. Because you want to basically do the testing, different geographical locations. I hope, and it should be the case, that if we do laboratory testing here at the QMD, the same sensor evaluated in the lab up in the Bay Area would produce the same result, but you don't know. You need consistency, basically, right? So that might take, a little bit of time because, just to give you an idea, like the capital investment alone just to buy the chamber and some of the equipment, it was more than $600,000 just for the equipment itself. So not all of the other air districts have the same level of funding. So.
It doesn't mean we couldn't deploy some of the performance sensors in AB 617, whether they're certified or not. You don't need to wait for certification. It still provides useful information. They don't need to be used for compliance purposes. And even if they are certified, they might be certified at levels that couldn't be used for compliance purposes anyway.
Yeah.
In my view, the point of certification is we could do all the testing we want and say they perform well in Southern California, but that doesn't mean they're going to perform well on the East Coast when it's snowing. Like the EPA methods call for, when the EPA certifies something, you have to do it in 3 different areas, 2 different seasons, and that's what costs so much money.
That's right. It's I think a field testing alone for kind of equipment for regulatory purposes is like 6-month deployment in the field, and it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to certify an instrument as an FEM federal equivalent method.
Bill?
Yeah. Philip, may I just answer the question I was going to answer? These data is not going to be used for compliance purposes. It's used to measure these pollutants in various communities or neighborhoods or whatever it is.
Not currently is it being used for compliance purposes. If performance gets to the point where it can be, then it could be, but we're a ways away from that.
We're a ways away from that. Do you envision that it might be used to supplement or instead of inspections?
Supplement, I would say, yes. I don't know, instead of.
I mean, isn't it possible that facilities, for compliance purposes at some point, will be able to purchase low-cost sensors and use them to demonstrate compliance at a much lower cost than they're currently incurring?
Yeah, I do think, for instance, say LDAR programs, leak detection repair programs by large facilities, refineries, or big oil and gas facilities. Those LDAR programs are very expensive and time-consuming, record-keeping, all that. There's hope that at some point, some of the, not the low-cost sensors, but super expensive laser-based systems could really help with that. But as a supplement to that, if these low-cost VOC sensors can come along a little bit further, then that could be part of that mix that could help maybe save costs.
Yeah, and you actually, separate from this project is the refinery monitoring project in Torrance. So that's also going to get off the ground at some point too, right?
Yeah, we are in the process of finalizing the contract.
Pretty extensive contract. I mean,
yeah, 2.5 million.
Yeah,
a lot.
To include some back-end data analysis and platform.
Yeah, it has like advanced line monitoring and also community monitoring, but for the most part using more kind of standard technology, but also some PM sensors, but mostly to engage the community.
So it seems to me this is kind of taking us in a different direction than our typical way that we look at enforcement. Because, I mean, just with that FluxSense testing, right, we were able to see a problem, identify it, and it was able to be corrected immediately without having to go through an enforcement process, which I think is real advantageous, you know, if we can do that. You know, no offense to our council here, but the enforcement, you know, I mean, process isn't necessary. I mean, our priority is to reduce the emissions and exposures to the pollutants. Mm-hmm. And if we can use these devices to find those problems and more immediately rectify them, and one of them was a vent that was stuck open, right? I mean, I'm picturing some guy walking up there and putting his finger on the vent, it closes, and he walks down, and it's all done, right? You know, and there could have been a lot of emissions and problems that were being caused by that one vent being stuck open. It was a simple fix. So I think in that case, the other case too, we have, I've been talking to Phil about this, is we have a lot of examples where, like in the MATES process, we didn't know there was a problem until we started monitoring, and then we discovered something, and then we used more extensive testing and certified testing and all that to verify it and to pinpoint it. And I think those is another example when the monitoring could have a direct beneficial impact in terms of pollution and emission reductions, exposure reduction, when we discover things that we don't know. By and large, the PM sensors are kind of showing what we expect.
Yeah, well, one potential compliance option here, we have to get a little bit further along, is 1466 was passed last year, so for cleanup of contaminated sites.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there's a requirement for PM10 monitoring. Yeah, and, you know, typically you would use the $20,000 instrument, or at least there's an $8,000 to $10,000 instrument out there I think we would probably trust at this point.
Right.
But if these get a little bit further along, the executive officer has the authority to allow some alternate means, and if we trust the peripheral air sensor or something here calibrated correctly, that would save a lot of money for those entities doing these cleanup sites. They only have to spend $200 or $300 on a sensor instead of $5,000 to $6,000 or
Or hire
$20,000.
a contracting firm that owns them,
That owns them.
deploys them, yeah.
So there's applications here, and you might be able to get better coverage because instead of just affording one, you might be able to circle the site.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Is there anything, there's a couple things. I saw the folks from Clarity last week. They give you the device yet?
Yeah.
Okay. It's actually pretty neat. They changed it a lot, and they put a solar panel on it, so it's drop and play and leave alone.
Yeah, so one of the issues now that we have is that a lot of these kind of high-tech companies, right? So they do very frequent firmware upgrades.
Yeah.
And then every now and then they redevelop their algorithm. So they send us email like, okay, can you start the field testing again after we have already 1 month worth of But we got to the point where now our cut is at 2 weeks. If within 2 weeks you have not changed your firmware or anything else, then we go the 2 months.
Right.
That 2 week period, you can do whatever you want to the device.
Yeah, that's interesting. They started off doing a really small device, and now they've gotten a big one, but it measures more than just PM. They're doing some ozone, I guess, and NO2 or something.
Yeah, some gases, yeah.
And it's changed completely. And then that company, Airbeam, they're doing a new version of theirs. Have they sent that to you?
We don't have it yet. But
okay.
We got in contact with
that one's interesting because it's portable, and that's what we use for the education purposes in classrooms. Again, it's more like you look at the numbers, are they low, medium, or high, other than a specific number. But it's great for educational purposes because kids can actually see on a cell phone what's being measured and walk around and put it in different situations and see things. But I'm assuming that the new one they're coming out with is going to be a little better.
That's they will claim that, but
you'll have to wait and see.
I think AQSpec has helped some of these manufacturers improve their products too, right?
So, and install fear in them. Because they're a little concerned of how it's going to perform, right?
Yeah, most vendors are willing to to use that information and then eventually improve their device if they need to. There are one or two that
they won't do it.
They don't want
to.
In
all honesty, if they haven't gone through the AQSpec process, I don't think they have any credibility. And at least in my mind, it's like, well, then I don't trust it. I want to see the assessment, the independent assessment of it, and how well it does under different circumstances, and the lab and the field measurements and all that. It just lends a lot of credibility to it.
Yeah, there's one device costs $10,000. It measures everything, and they got a very poor evaluation. And now they don't want to test it again. They have like version 2 or 3, and just like, no, thank you.
Okay, we have any other questions for Andrea? Comments?
Well, this is Janet from Steve, and I just wanted to really commend Andrea and this whole team at AQSpec for the work they're doing. One thought about the certification and kind of the interplay with 617, I think we need the guidance in terms of the tiered applicability sooner rather than later, and also the guidance on the QA/QC. So if there's a way to be informing the statewide process under 617 that's short of certification and better matches kind of the timeframes we're dealing with, there might be a phased approach where we start providing that information. And then later on, when certification kind of at a bigger level can be done to pursue that, but not to hold back on getting the information out there, at least here in California, to really aid 617 implementation.
Yeah, Janet, this is Joe. I would agree with that and say that I think that 617 would have benefited from a better understanding of the status and evolution and process of these low-cost sensors and what you can and cannot do with them. So yeah, informing that process is going to be really important. And making sure everyone has a common understanding of what's, where things are. Okay. Member of the public? A member of the public does.
So, kind of on that same topic on the multi-tiered certification, and I know that was an example that starting with regulatory compliance and then fence line and community monitoring, and I didn't know if maybe Andrea could kind of explain the distinction between the two, since the fence line monitoring is regulatory, or at least some of it is, and the community monitoring is statutory. What is the distinction in those two tiers, I guess?
It's a good question. I mean, this is really was an example only, but I think that I don't know at this point, fence line monitoring is really regulatory, or
it's
kind of
it's required. It doesn't mean that if you have a certain level detected that there's any.
Yeah, there wasn't any standard adopted.
No standard adopted, so it's not necessarily what this means by regulatory, which is that there is a standard
that you're
being compared.
Although in your plan, you'll have some at least
thresholds for informational purposes and notification.
Yeah, I think you have to get it in the field and see what's going on before you can start attaching regulatory standards to it. I mean,
Well, I would add, it often is a slippery slope with nuisance violations, right? So if there start to be higher readings and communities are involved, then there's often enforcement action taken because of that, even though there's not necessarily a regulatory standard, and I could see that happening more with AB 617. So I think there is a blending of the two tiers and enforcement, even though they're like for tier 1, it's not a, if you exceed X, Y, and Z, you will receive an NOV.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of South Coast nuisance enforcement actions, it's always odor-based and it's always verified odor complaints before you're taking action, right?
It's not always odor-based anymore. Speaking from the gas company, when Aliso fence line monitors had an exceedance event.
Oh, really?
And there's a big press release.
I have a conflict on that, so I didn't follow it as closely as I
so I think it's a slightly, and I would imagine from a community perspective, if community members are seeing elevated readings, they're going to want action to be taken, right? So even if there's not a regulatory enforcement standard, I think we're in a, I think
that's maybe one of the top questions that we always get from community members, like, are these actionable data? And they're not, right? But they can lead to action. That's kind of the way we explain it, because they are survey tools, they are very good at identifying the problem. And if we think there is a problem, then we zoom in and try to see what the problem is.
Right, of course. I mean, that's the whole.
But directly, they are not.
That's an interesting question about nuisance. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's it's a tool. It's an enforcement tool.
Yeah, but you would, in that case, you would really want to have at least a qualitative understanding of when nuisance NOVs might be issued and might not be.
I would
in those circumstances. Right.
Are we talking about that at 1:30?
Oh, you are.
Are we? Yes.
Oh, 408.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, but actually, that's a good point, right? So Phil's bringing up the 40, the circumvention rule that's been amended. Yeah. There's a public consultation today, and it's all of these policies are
wrapped up in each other,
and they really are. It's a new model.
Well, Andrea, thank you so much for
the
presentation. I always get something out of it, even though I've sat through a variety of different forms of it. There's always something new and interesting going on. Okay, subcommittee status reports. Item 8, freight sustainability. There's no Dan here.
Okay. Well, I think there's a lot of activity going on. I'm sorry, I don't have a formal report today. But there's a number of actions happening at the ARB board meeting on the 22nd. So there, as we received our ARB update earlier. And then there's updates to Moyer guidelines. There's a whole lot going on in the freight space, and a lot of overlap between what the district's doing and what ARB is doing, and the holdover of the board's contemplation of ISRs, or facility-based measures, I should say, for warehouses and fleet certification. So I'm just laundry listing a lot of things, but there's a lot going on in the freight space. I'd also add that one thing that SoCalGas has been tracking closely and talking to South Coast about as well is ARB's proposal on the Volkswagen settlement funds, which frankly, can speak for the company, we're very disappointed by the allocation and the lack of focus on heavy-duty trucking space. And so that's something that I think makes sense for South Coast to be concerned about. It doesn't really align with the air quality management plan. It doesn't
Especially
align
in terms of cost-effective NOx emission reductions.
Exactly. So the portion, I guess I'll take a step back. The Volkswagen Settlement Mitigation Fund or Beneficiary Trust, ARB has released guidelines for the use of those dollars. Those are dollars that South Coast's incentive funding plan is kind of counting on in some ways
Hoping for, how about that?
hoping for. It is listed as one of the concrete sources of funding for the air quality management plan. And ARB's proposal, and it's been workshopped a little bit, there was just a workshop here at South Coast, I think it was last week, if I'm getting my weeks correct, maybe it was the week before. The plan has allocated funding in a way where it does not prioritize the heavy duty trucking sector. I think there's only about $60 million allocated for that sector, mixed with marine funds as well. And so that obviously would not be getting immediate NOx reductions. A lot of the other much higher percentage funded sources were kind of hoping for ZEV technologies that are not here now, which is the reductions that South Coast needs now. So there's definitely a delayed focus in terms of the technologies that will be funded from those settlement funds. And I point out that there is actually a whole other trust set up for electric infrastructure and a whole other slew of things. And so this was the NOx mitigation portion of the funds. And so we're looking, to I guess, gain traction statewide and talk to ARB about that. I don't think it aligns with South Coast's SCAQMD and other goals. So that's something I think that's bubbled up in the freight sector that should be of interest to this committee as it relates to the AQMP. And there's a whole lot going on.
Yeah, and also on the funding side, then the governor's proposal for the greenhouse gas mitigation funding was significantly less than last year when it comes to heavy duty trucks. Dropped from 320 million to 160. So there's some questions about whether or not that's needs to be supplemented in some way, shape, or form during the budget process. Okay, any other freight stuff? Let's move on to small business considerations and Bill and Mark.
Well, aside from spending 2 days completing the workplace harassment training.
It took you 2 days to do 2 hours of training? You flunked the first time?
You kept asking me for my password, and then I never taken a report, so I didn't have a password. Yeah. But anyway, I think the site was down over the weekend, but I finished it yesterday. Anyway, I took since our last meeting, we've been spending a lot of time participating in the working groups for the transitioning of reclaim into command and control. And that continues to raise a lot of questions for us. Also participated in the working group for on 1469 for metal finishers, particularly chrome platers, hoping that won't lead to the demise of that industry. But I see now where it's been that there is no set hearing set yet I think that goes to stationary source next
Right.
month. And then I guess a determination is made. And then finally, I've, at your suggestion, your urging at our January meeting, I've been talking with my members, my trade association members, on this incentive funding. And it's gotten mixed results. I think one of the biggest deterrents to that, and I guess I should back up, because last year I remember making some remarks at Stationary Source when Philip was making a presentation about the RFP going out to prospective bidders and everything, and I asked the question, at least I thought I did, would only bidders or OEMs be permitted to offer suggestions or proposals or ideas? And the answer was no, anybody can. And so I thought, well, why not? Because oftentimes when you get these RFPs, you have people coming in like, 1146, where you have all of these different furnace manufacturers coming in and they're jockeying for marketplace. I don't know which is better, or Reams or somebody else's. But anyway, and I think you as a staff may miss some other opportunities there. So that's what I was hoping for. But one of the deterrents in this is that when small businesses look at that, they're overwhelmed by the amount of paperwork and calculations and everything that your staff says is the only way that they can be considered. And small business owners just, that turns them off immediately. My Sioma folks, the California Independent Oil Marketers, gas station folks, I think they spoke to staff about possibility of offering these E85 tanks and pumps, and we're told that that wouldn't qualify. They weren't told why not, but just that it wouldn't qualify. My thought there was possibly electric charging stations might be an opportunity. The association has some mixed feelings about that as far as the amount of money, capital investment required, and the payback on those. But
yeah.
But anyway, it's they haven't discounted that. I was also thinking too that the dry cleaners, they have 2.5 years left on PERC. And I know that there's some funding available. I checked with Derek on Waterbase or Aqueous, but maybe for dry cleaners who wanted to take some early action to get rid of PERC, get out of PERC 2.5 years early, that might be a possibility. I know CARB is used to doing public workshops, but that was an idea. And then, of course, my metal finishers. I know it can't be for compliance purposes, but there isn't a rule yet. And this is going to be a horrific expenditure for these people, large and small. And politics isn't the only thing that makes strange bedfellows. And I guess I was struck by Jane Williams' comments last week about her views on 1469 as being a terrible rule that doesn't serve the community, doesn't serve the environment, and punishes businesses, in her opinion. And I guess to some extent I agree with that. And would think that, would hope that, maybe that industry might be considered an opportunity for some of these funds to ease that transition. But I think in order to do that, staff is going to have to invite some of these people in not just through the RFP process, but if you're really interested in reducing emissions or reducing health risk, maybe you just don't be so rigid on the RFP process. You know, I mean, you told me you want to spend that, or you have to spend that 61 million. Well, here are some opportunities to do that.
Well, so first, I don't think we're being rigid. I don't think we've ever released an RFP as wide open as this one. We are just like the Moira program. Its owner operators are the primary target. Like, so if you own equipment, that's what we want. Now, is it true that OEMs of equipment come in with an owner partner to say we're going to have this technology and we're going to work with so and so to implement it? Yes, but usually there needs to be specifics about what you're going to do, and in order to do that, it has to be actually installed. We've had 4 regional workshops on it. We had a bidders conference. We've told people, like, come on in if you're having trouble with the calculations. We can help. We don't actually require those calculations. If we could do it, we could look at that after the fact. We're trying to be as wide open as possible. In terms of early compliance for PERC, the rule of thumb for early compliance is generally more than 3 years. So Moira looks at it, I believe. So if you're already only 2.5 years out, and by the time you actually get it installed, you're probably only 1.5, 2 years early compliance. So that's not necessarily cost effective. But on the plating, one thing we would love to see is proposals on alternatives to hexchrome, which is something we want to do some demo projects on.
UV, DV,
Yeah.
LED.
Also looking for UV, and other applications, and also there's some other work that we need in the non-PFAS fume suppressants. There's some things that could be done within that RFP that we could pay for because it's not required by rule.
Yeah, it would be great to have some pilot transitions if there were people who were interested in that.
Yeah, I mean,
especially decorative plating facilities that were interested in going to a trivalent or some other process, so we can know exactly where the problems may lay, what the costs are, and all that. I would love to see that.
I'm thinking this may be nothing more than a case of creating a venue for this.
Where to have that conversation.
You know, have some sort of conversation like this could take place.
Inviting people in. Let's have a big meeting. We could talk about all these options, like outreach. We've sent it out to all our typical permittees, so they know it exists. So they've got the typical email saying this is available. But that targeted outreach is something we've done a little bit of, but need help from people who.
Well, I'm just relaying, you know, what I'm hearing from my conversations with my members. So.
Well, we should bring this up again on Friday when 1469 comes up. So a bunch of the platers will be here.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that it on all business? Great. Kurt, you now have not only EJ on your plate, but 617 implementation.
And I offered to help him if he wants.
Pardon?
I offered to help you with 617.
Okay, yeah, that would be helpful to talk about what the district's doing. I do have kind of a report on what CARB is doing. Right now, the task is to identify communities, target communities for the actual work to begin. To identify that by October 1st, for CARB to come up with a list of communities. October 1st of this year. So they have put out a draft community error protection program, sort of a framework for how the process is supposed to work. They are looking to the districts to provide recommendations for communities to include in this initial round of the program. However, communities can also self-recommend, and there's a process for how they go about doing that. This guidance, the draft framework includes a description of the process and criteria for making the community selections. It also has a description of the process that air districts are supposed to follow to develop recommendations. And then CARB will evaluate their submittals. They're looking for the district to submit an initial list of communities by April 30th of this year. The districts will then finalize their selections, the communities to submit it to CARB by July 31st. In August, CARB would post recommended, its list of recommended communities, and then go to their CARB board in September for a hearing to finalize the selection. So there's a lot of work going on in there.
Kurt, is that the concept paper that they have?
Yeah,
That's what
it's called Clean Air Protection, Community Air Protection Program. It's on their website.
But it's their concept paper.
Yeah.
They also have guidelines for community
Right.
selection.
Oh, okay.
So they have
That's separate.
two documents.
They also have the, I mentioned earlier, the RFP for the $5 million for community involvement. CARB had a technical summit. It was an all-day technical summit. Well, throughout the state, but one in South Coast and Riverside that we participated in. We've kicked off our community outreach. We had one meeting in Commerce a couple of weeks ago. Last night we were in Wilmington. Had a really good turnout. This goes to some of your outreach to the EJ groups in the local communities. We had probably over 100 people there. Had breakout sessions, a lot of brainstorming, some really good ideas. We have 3 more of those scheduled. And there'll probably be additional ones scheduled as well.
Yeah, there's one on March 27th in Riverside. These are all in the evening, 6 to 8. Tuesday, April 10th at San Bernardino Loma Linda University, and April 17th at the Brookhurst Community Center in Anaheim.
I did get a complaint from some EJ folks about meeting fatigue.
Actually, what we did or are doing, we're actually combining 2 sets of meetings that CARB is having us do. So we're combining it with the AB 134 outreach or the expenditure, the Moya expenditure. So we didn't want to have that fatigue. We tried to combine them, which has been a little awkward at times, but we're recognizing that.
It looks like the process generally is starting to sort itself out a bit. Yeah. But it's still kind of chaotic.
So I was talking to Dr. Liu before the meeting that maybe it would be helpful or informative at the least to have CARB and the district come back with a report. I'm thinking maybe in July about what the status is.
Yeah, well, we'll have a lot more in July.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, why don't we do that and try to, and we'll put it on the agenda as a separate item in July, since everyone's going to have an ongoing interest and there'll be new developments.
Yeah, and we'll keep you informed on in our next meeting, which would be what, May, of anything new that's happening.
Okay. The other, we have climate change activities, and David's not here. Anything on climate comes to mind?
What's it gonna say?
The governor is going to sue the oil companies.
What's that?
The governor is going to sue the oil companies.
The governor is.
Yeah, Arnold
is.
personally.
That's funny. Really? I didn't know that. I didn't see that.
Maybe they upped the price of jet fuel for its plane.
Lauren?
I have one more question going back to 617. I was a little slow on the uptake. With all the community groups, and I know that there's going to be a list of community, or we're going to be, I think we're going to the board in July with South Coast's list. At the summit that ARB held, there's a lot of conversation and all these workshops going on about what's the definition of a community and how is that being defined. So wondering, has South Coast progressed on thinking about line drawing or?
Definitely been thinking about it.
Okay, so I mean, is that all part of the proposal that you'll be putting together?
We'll have to do that. We got some good feedback last night.
Okay, interesting.
All over the place, but.
Yeah, it's big. It depends on the community, of course. Okay, thank you.
God forbid you put San Pedro in with Wilmington or West Long Beach, right?
Yeah.
No, I have a question.
Oh, sure.
Point 2. So it's going to the board Power Board in July. Are there reports before that to Stationary Source or Home
Probably go to
Rule?
stationary in June.
Okay. So the initial April one goes straight here.
That's very preliminary. I don't even think there's gonna be a prioritization. That'll kind of get to like at least rough definitions and how many communities we're even looking at, but it won't necessarily have like priorities or
And
first year.
we're letting everybody know that this is an ongoing process and they're not all being selected the first year, but you know, the way 617 is set up is we keep adding communities year after year.
At that technical summit, I think Harv said several hundred communities may be identified.
Yeah, but obviously you can't address them all at once. So our initial thought is it would be great if by July we could get everyone, not everyone's gonna agree, but the board to adopt something that has our full list with like full priorities all the way down the list. But we may not get there. We may just be like, okay, here's our full list and this is what we wanna do in the first year or maybe first and second year, and we'll be working towards prioritizing the rest.
Yeah, there's a little bit of an issue that comes about when you start doing that, because if you do it in chunks, maybe, but then you're starting to pit communities against each other, and you know they're wrestling in the aisles over I should be 81 instead of 84. You know.
We're hoping not.
Yeah, so I think we have to be careful about that because we don't want the communities feeling like they're necessarily in competition with each other over all of this, and my problems are worse than yours, or you know, I should undermine that community because it would move me up the list or things like that.
But as we were talking before, as you pointed out, it's not likely that the regulations are going to be adopted on a sub-regional type of basis, so that if you identify problems that are common to multiple communities, in one community you solve the problem in multiple communities.
Yeah. The other piece,
perhaps,
is there really a hard line like you're in or out? I mean, Andrea just talked about 7 communities getting monitoring, and we're obviously doing work in all these areas, and we're working on rules that are going to benefit. So it may not be that you're like 100% first year, but you're partially in first year, and you're going to keep working towards getting it fully addressed. Like there's a lot of different ways it can go, and we'll just see how it goes.
You decided how you're going to deal with the cumulative impacts issues within a geographic region?
Thinking about it, just like defining a community.
You're going to do specific geographic-based mini AQMPs and rule adoption measures that only apply to those geographic regions? Yeah, I'm not just teasing you, you don't know that. None of us know that, but it's complicated, you know. I mean, what we do know is that there's some communities that have disproportionate impacts that need relief in some way, but how that actually looks in the end.
Yeah, I foresee it definitely measures in that direction. Like if it takes a regulatory form, what form that is, I think that's kind of an open question, because it's hard enough to pass as many rules as we have if we had different rules for every single community. There's all kinds of other issues with that, so.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments on any subcommittee status report items? Great. We will move on to item 9, which is Dr. Fine-Helling's report from and to stationary source.
Just real quick, February, a lot of that stuff is already somewhat moot because it's either adopted or coming back.
Yep.
But I'll just talk about
Friday?
March, this Friday, which is a Reclaim Quarterly Report, which we come back quarterly to talk about the reclaim transition process. 408, which we have that meeting this afternoon, and is going to the board in April, but this was a report back. And then 1469. So as Bill mentioned, we did not set hearing as proposed last month governing board meeting, but it's up to Stationary Source Committee to decide whether we're ready to set hearing in April for May hearing.
So you couldn't come up with anything controversial or complicated or important? Reclaim.
This is pretty light
408
compared to
circumvention. Really? Yeah.
Originally had the boiler 1146
on there too.
On there too, so that got kicked off.
It gets delayed. So, yeah, it's a light agenda. Only 3 controversial issues.
Well, we'll see what progress you can make this afternoon on 408.
45 minutes.
Yeah. I guess it's a little late now, but we could have started early. Mobile Source is canceled. So I gotta drive all the way out here for one little committee meeting.
Colin?
No, I think not. Okay, any questions or comments on that? Member of the public, your third to last chance. Okay, any other business that wasn't on the agenda that we need to talk about?
I have one
Yes.
comment, question. I understand there is going to be a governing board retreat this year?
Yes, there is.
So
We haven't
here's
invited you yet. No, actually, there is. May something.
10th and 11th, I believe.
No, I'm gonna take a look at my calendar. I just put it in.
As a group?
What's that?
Could we get some information on it as a group? I know I usually go or.
Yeah, I don't know if it's all been 100%.
I think you all went to
Yep,
Washington.
it's May 10th and 11th, and it is Indian Wells. What's the name of it?
Yeah.
I don't know the name of it. Oh, it's
Stagecoach, Coachella?
No,
That's right.
it's after Coachella.
So,
We made the mistake of having one right before Coachella one time.
so there's no agenda yet, so that's what you guys are interested in. We'll get you the agenda.
And,
once
and,
it's-
and the location too.
Indian Wells, I forget the name of the resort, whatever it is. It's somewhere out there in Indian Wells.
I don't have that either.
Yeah.
Maybe
Denise,
that out.
Denise knows.
It's not like we've known for more than a couple of days. It's just got an email recently. Maybe it was last week. I can't remember. But anyway, yes, there is going to be a retreat. I never know what's going to be on the agenda until I show up.
So it's the Renaissance Indian Wells Resort and Spa.
Ooh, it's nice. Yeah, but,
It's
sorry.
nice. All right. Good. Have a lazy river?
Awesome.
We can hold a meeting while floating around the lazy river. Okay. Sounds okay to me. All right. Any other business? Okay. Public comment. Anyone at any of our remote facilities or locations? Or anyone in the room as a member of the public would like to address us on something that's not on the agenda that we haven't already discussed? Time's expiring. Okay. Great. That brings us to adjournment. We will meet again on May 9th, right here in CC8. Thank you everyone who joined us on the phone. We're gonna now consume our lunch. So thanks everybody. Bye.
Thank you.